The ferry system, as we know it today, wasn't originally made for cars. I met my wife on this destroyer escort. Don't worry, the ferry is just getting out of the way in one of the busiest ship channels in the United States. It's a selfie. It's a selfie. Just full throttle into the dock. This is the moment of truth. Oh no. Okay. Okay, Amy, where are we going? I didn't mean to just come bust in. Here we are on the Galveston Bolivar Ferry, crossing one of the busiest ship channels in the United States. I know this isn't a walk in my neighborhood, but I thought we could expand a little bit. Right behind me, we have Galveston. What we know today is a 20-minute ride from Galveston to Bolivar isn't anything new. Welcome to Galveston Unscripted. People have been crossing from Galveston to Bolivar and from Bolivar to Galveston for hundreds of years, whether using a small boat or a larger paid vessel. Right behind me, we have Pelican Island. Most of Pelican Island is actually man-made, except for some of these parts where Seawolf Park and a little bit farther north, this little area over here, there's Pelican Island and Pelican Spit. As you can see behind me, we have vessels waiting at the Bolivar roads. These vessels are waiting to go into the Port of Houston or the Port of Texas City. They could be waiting for fuel, for customs, for supplies, anything like that. Right behind me here, we have the sunken concrete ship known as the Selma, scuttled in Galveston Bay in the 1920s after a failed plan to build concrete vessels, as steel was in short supply. The ferry system, as we know it today, wasn't originally made for cars and trucks and things like that. It was actually made for rail cars. The rail system that was running from New Orleans to Beaumont and into Galveston came through Bolivar, where you would hit the end of Bolivar Peninsula and your rail car would be loaded onto a barge with tracks, and a tugboat would come and pull or push you over to Galveston. Now that style of rail system started in the late 1800s and continued until the 1930s, when personally operated vehicles took over. You can kind of make out the Bolivar Lighthouse, just ever so slightly. You may or may not know that this ferry is actually part of the highway system. What started as a franchise, a personal venture, was eventually taken over by the Highway Department and then into the Texas Department of Transportation that operates it today. Even though the landings and ownership has slightly changed, this ferry service has continued for well over 100 years. Not only a major part of the logistics of the highway system, it's the best free boat ride you can get around. Always look for dolphins when you're on the ferry. After a quick podcast recording on location at the Bolivar Lighthouse, I am headed back to Galveston from the Bolivar side. In the distance, you can kind of see Fort Travis just to the right of the Bolivar Lighthouse, one of the first forts established for the Republic of Texas after it gained independence from Mexico. So the ferries actually have a really fun design where they never actually have to turn around after loading vehicles on one side. They just keep moving back and forth, and the captain or the mate on board walks from one side to the other. It's a selfie. It's a selfie. As you can tell, it is quite windy out here, but what a beautiful way to spend the day. So here we are, literally in the middle of the Galveston, Texas City, and Houston Ship Channel, the logistical gateway to the economy of Texas. Something to remember the next time you're on the ferry. Could you imagine, back in the 1800s, riding a train from Beaumont down to Port Bolivar and having your rail car loaded onto a barge, then hopping on that ferry into the rail car and chugging along across the bay to be delivered safely to Galveston? There's so much to see and talk about, but I cannot find a spot that is not unbelievably windy. At the extreme east end of Galveston, at the opening of the ship channel, we have the Coast Guard base, established in Galveston in the 1870s. Just another fun fact, during a hurricane, all of the ferry boats are manned, whether they are running passengers or not. They usually have a cutoff point when it gets too bad, when a hurricane's coming through. But every one of these vessels is manned, and they basically just full throttle into the dock, making sure that that ferry boat does not come off the dock and become debris in the hurricane. Behind me, we have the USS Stewart and the USS Kavala at Seawolf Park. Let me know if you guys want me to talk about that. I actually know a lot about that. But this area over here is where the Galveston Quarantine Station was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. If you're an immigrant and you arrived in Galveston and you happen to be sick, you were showing symptoms, you were coming from a specific location, you would actually be held at a quarantine station on Pelican Island. But those buildings actually stood until the 1970s. So if you're ever on the ferry and you start coming to a complete stop, or you just completely change direction from a normal ferry route, the ferry is just getting out of the way of the normal traffic in one of the busiest ship channels in the United States. Believe it or not, I met my wife on this destroyer escort right over here. Here we have a barge probably carrying some type of bunker fuel for those vessels waiting out in Bolivar Roads. Here we go, coming into the landing, making our nice approach. It is actually very windy, so we're coming in at an angle here, but I'm sure our captain can just slide us right in without hitting a single bumper. What do you think? I think this is the moment of truth. Oh yeah, we're hitting it. We hit it. Oh no.
Galveston has been president being celebrated. It's important